Okay, so good morning, everyone. I will resume this lecture by recalling what we did at the end of on Friday. So we started to study the second problem I defined in the introduction, that is communication over a noisy channel. So the very basic scheme that you have to have in mind is that you have some message you want to transmit from a sender to a receiver through a channel which is noisy, so which does not give as an output exactly what you put as an input. And so this will create difficulties for the receiver to receive properly the message sent by the sender. So to be more precise, I define two models for these noisy channels. So in this setting, what the sender tries to communicate are bits, so zeros or ones, and the channel acts as noise independently on each of the bits in the same way. So in the first model of a channel, in the binary erasure channel, the noise arises in the way that sometimes the bits are correctly transmitted and sometimes they are not transmitted at all. Okay, in that case, the receiver knows that he has lost some information because he knows that there has been an erasure along the channel. And epsilon here is the probability of erasure of one of the bits. So, in particular, if epsilon is equal to 0, there is no noise at all. The output is equal to the input. And if epsilon is equal to 1, there is no signal at all. There is nothing that comes out of the channel. Another model of a channel is a binary symmetric channel, where here in output you always receive something, but with a probability p that now I will try to avoid conflict of notation to denote pf for p flip. So pf will be the probability of a bit flip during the communication. So again, if pf is equal to 0, there is no noise. The output is equal to the input. And here, actually, you could first think that it's pf equal 1, which gives you a very bad channel, but that is not true. Because pf equals 1 is just replacing zeros by 1 and 1 by 0. But this, if you know what the channel is doing, is not losing any information. The worst thing happens when pf is equal to 1/2, because here, well, you see that the output is equal to 0 or 1, with probability 1/2, completely independently of what was the input. And there is no signal at all in what comes out. Okay, we are all good on this definition. So let me add now one definition that might seem not very well motivated for the moment, but wait 5 minutes and you will see why I define in this way. So I will define the capacity of a channel in the following way. So this capacity is a mutual information between the input and the output of a channel. So this is the random variable describing the input of a channel, and y is the output. And here, I want to take the max over all the laws, the probability laws of the input. Okay, so you remember that we discussed at length in the first lecture the meaning of entropy and information, so I'm not going to redo this lecture, but this precisely gives you an idea of how much information you can obtain from the output of the channel about the input of it. Okay, so the higher, the better you can infer the input from the output. And I will leave as two short exercises to compute this capacity for the binary erasure channel and for the binary symmetric channel, and I give you the result. So for the binary erasure channel, it is what you can guess. So it's 1 minus epsilon. So this just tells you that the bits that you receive gives you 1 bit of information. The bits where you have an erasure don't give you any information. So it's very reasonable, but you should, I invite you to check from the definition that this is indeed the case. And for the binary symmetric channel, this will be, you will find that this is 1 minus h of pf, where I recall that here this small h is the binary entropy function. So h of q is minus q log 2q minus 1 minus q log 2 1 minus q. So you see that if you plot these capacities as a function of the parameter, well, okay, for the binary erasure channel, okay, it decreases linearly with the amount of noise epsilon. And here in this case, it's not exactly the same shape, but it has some similar qualitative features. So as a function of the probability of a bit flip, you see that it goes to 0 when the bit flip is 1/2, as we could have guessed, as we discussed intuitively before. Okay? But you see that this is a general definition that you can apply to more generic channel with, arbitrary alphabets. And we will see now in the following that it has, a very precise meaning. Okay, so another, I've already discussed a little bit what I want to do in this part, but let me be a bit more precise. So, okay, we have a channel which is unreliable, which adds some error in the process of transmission. But still, we want to transmit information, and we want to transmit ideally without error. So all the game of this part is precisely to see how we should act to counterbalance the noise of the channel. So here you see it's a little bit a dual problem with respect to the compression we have seen in the first part. So in compression, there were irrelevant information in the original file, for instance, which allowed us to reduce the size by compressing it. Okay, so, and we saw that the amount that we could remove was given by the entropy of the original source. Here, in some sense, it's a dual question. So it's, if you want, the noise in just the channel is going to remove some information from what you send. So to counterbalance this, you have to add some extra redundancy in the original message, which will be screwed by the channel. But if you have added enough extra information, you will still be fine to get the message out correctly. Okay, so that's the idea, and I will, in the following, I will detail all that. So the idea is that, more precisely, instead of sending directly your message through the noisy channel, well, first you encode it. So you have a mapping, which is the encoder here. So if this is a string of bits, well, clearly, from the discussion I just gave here, you should make it a longer and we shall see how much longer we need string of bits. So with extra redundant information, this you send through the noisy channel. So here you get a corrupted version of the encoded message. And only here, now, you try to decode. So you obtain back, hopefully, the original message you had sent. Okay, so the operation is here adding some form of redundancy and trying to remove the noise from the output you obtain. Okay, and let me add another definition, which again will be tied together with the capacity later on, which is the rate of a code will be the number of bits of the message divided by the number of bits of the encoded message. Okay, so from what I said, this should be always smaller than 1. You don't want to remove information from the message if on top of it you have to fight the noise. So this will be smaller than 1, and the larger the better. Okay, because it costs you something to transmit through the message. I mean, it can cost you physical energy. If you think of radio waves, it can cost you money. I mean, everything is about money at the end. But you want to have this ratio as big as possible if you want to minimize the redundancy you are putting. But still, you want to be able to correct the mistake. So there is a compromise between the two. Okay, so let's start by a very simple way of trying to fight the noise. And this I will call naive coding. And, well, the simplest way to add some redundancy when there is a noisy channel is just to repeat oneself. That's, as you guess, the basis of pedagogy, and that's what I'm doing, and all teachers do to fight the noise in the communication process with the students. But this can also be formalized in this way. So let me say just that if in input of the message I take 1 bit which is equal to 0, and then I encode as 0, 0, 0. If instead I want to send a 1, well, instead of a 1, I send 3 1s. Okay? And let's see what happens if I send this through the binary symmetric channel with a flip, some flip probability of flip, which, okay, without loss of generality, I will assume smaller than 1.5. Okay, by symmetry, you can deal with the other case. So, okay, so that's the definition of the encoding procedure. So now we have to decide what to do to decode. Suppose that you get 3 zeros in output. How would you decode this? Yeah, it seems reasonable to assume that the sender sent a 0. Assume that you received 001 or 010 or 100. It's still reasonable to assume that it's a 0. And, okay, on the contrary, if you receive 21 or 3 1s, it is, again, reasonable to decode as a 1. Okay, so we have gained something, because here you see that if there is only one flip, we are able to correct for this mistake by taking the majority rule. Okay, so well, a few comments. So yeah, so this I'm decoding using the majority rule. So that's why it's better to use an odd number of repetition, because then you have no possibilities of tie. So that's just a detail. But and also the other thing I want to note here is that here the rate is 1/3. Okay, but because I'm using 3 bits to encode 1 bit. So let's see what we have gained from the probability, from the point of view of the probability of error. So the probability of error without encoding, well, it would be just correspond to decode as just take the bit that you have received. Okay, and then here you see that the probability would be precisely the probability of the mistake in each choose of the channel. If I use this repetition with the 3 steps, well, the probability of error becomes the probability that there has been 2 or 3 spin flips on the 3 use of the channel, which is PF cube plus 3 PF square 1 minus PF. I think it's clear. It's a binomial random variable, so I'm just taking the probability that this is 3 or this is 2 flips among the 3. Okay, so if I plot this as a function of PF, the parameter noise, okay, again from 0 to 1/2, what I see is that so without encoding, I have just the straight line, and with the encoding, I get something which is lower. So this is with encoding. So, well, that's good. I mean, we have gained something. We are making a smaller. The probability of mistake is smaller. But actually, this is not good at all, because this is certainly better, but we have a strictly positive probability of error as soon as the flip probability is strictly positive. And to achieve this, what I would consider now a small improvement, we need to use a rate of 1/3. So we need to waste 3 bits of each time we want to send 1 bit. Okay, so you could think that okay, I have just repeated 3 times, so repeat 5 times or 7 times. So, well, you see, this is going to be steeper and steeper, but still this statement will still be true, and the rate will be 1/5, 1/5, 1/7, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's better from the point of view of the probability of mistake, but it's degrading very fast with the number of repetition, and the rate will be very bad. So the question is, can one do better than this? And the answer is provided by the so-called Shannon channel coding theorem. And the answer, I mean, surprisingly or not, depending on the point of view, I will decide, I will discuss this later. The answer is yes. And one can do much, much better. And so the statement is that there exists encodings. So to be precise, you need that you take strings as messages of growing length. Okay, I will come back more precisely afterwards, but I give you first the intuitive statement. So it's possible to encode and decode with the probability of error that goes to 0 in this thermodynamic limit. 0, not positive, 0. For all rates that I will denote R, smaller than the capacity of the channel. So remember, on the other side of the board, you have the definition of the capacity of a channel, and then the rates, and Shannon puts the two together. So you see now that the definition of the capacity was a relevant one, because that's the best. So see the capacity. Now you can interpret it as the best achievable rate with vanishing probability of error in the decoding. Okay. Note that this is a statement which has a little bit of the taste of physics, in the sense that this is a statement in the thermodynamic limit. So you need to take encodings of, you need to encode longer and longer sequences. And okay, this, I think that depending on your point of view, you can view this either as impossible or as completely obvious. And I think that both point of views are acceptable and can contain some truth, in the sense that first it is impossible, obviously, part that it is, but it is impossible because the channel always creates noise and mistakes. How could it be possible to reconstruct exactly the input from something that you cannot be completely sure? This seems paradoxical. The solution of the conundrum is that it is an asymptotic statement. So probability of error will never be really 0, but tends to 0 in the thermodynamic limit. Okay, that's why it's not, okay, it seems impossible, it's not completely. On the other hand, it is completely obvious, in the sense that mutual information, so we said that it was, let's say, the amount of information you gain on the input from the reading of the output. And what this tells you is that the rate is the amount of redundancy you put in the message. What this tells you is that you just have to put the correct amount of information according to our interpretation with the guessing game of last time. Just need to put the correct additional, the correct quantity of redundancy, just enough to fight the noise which is measured by the capacity of the channel. Okay, so both explanations sounds reasonable, and they are. So that's why it's a non-trivial statement and a non-trivial result, this Shannon theorem. Okay, is this, yeah?
So if you are trying to encode a finite message, you cannot get that limit, right? No matter what you do.
No, the limit is on the size of the system. on the length of the message. I will be more precise. I will give now more formal definition about it. But again, yes, it is an asymptotic statement. Other questions on this? Okay, so let me be slightly more formal in order to precise these definitions. Okay, so let me define what I mean in these various boxes of messages and encoded messages and so on. So, what is a message? I will consider that it is a string. So, when from now on, when I use underline, is to denote a vector of a certain number of things. So here, it will be a vector of 0 of this. I will call it of length L. Okay, so that's, and these are bits. So this is 0, 1 for each of the entries. Okay, so that's what I want to send. I will denote the encoded message again as X, which has now n bits. Again, 0, 1, n. And so here you see that I am adding redundancy, so n is larger than L, and the rate, okay, is L over n. From the definition I gave before. So this is the encoder. And what the channel does is to corrupt this X so what goes out is a vector, okay, which I will denote Y, of again the same length n, but this will be I will denote key out the alphabet of the output of the channel. So for the back, key out is 0 or 1 or an erasure. Okay, and for the binary symmetric channel, the outputs are also 0s and 1. Okay, and from this, I have first. Okay, so now from the point of view of the receiver, I have a Y. Okay. And ideally, I would like to come back to Z. Okay, so here you see, I should first consider trying to recover the input of the channel. So I should find a guess that I will denote X hat based on the observation of the output of the channel. And then I should come back on the from the starting point of the corrected message. Okay, so this will be a Z hat, again a guess, which will be based on the observation of the message. And okay, I will discuss this again, but actually this you shouldn't lose anything of basing your guess of the original encoded message from your guess of the corrected encoded message. I will come back on this point later on. So is it okay if I use this part of the blackboard? Or? Okay.
Is Shannon theorem only true for these two kinds of channels?
No. This is true for any channel.
Even if you erase information completely?
Well, I mean that's what you do in the binary eraser channel.
Yeah, but you still know there was some information
I mean, you mean if you erase completely the information, then the capacity is 0 and the theorem is true but void. But it is really, I mean, no, it is true for any channel. Because, I mean, you see, it manipulates very basic things, which are capacity and rate, and the capacity, the definition I gave was completely, I mean, you can apply this definition to any kind of alphabets. Okay, so what do I mean here by this encoding? So the encoding takes the possible messages and sends them to these encoded messages, to the code words, through a function that I will denote f encoding. Okay? So this x, okay, I will start drawing some high-dimensional space. So this is the space of all x possible. So this is the cube, the Hamming cube, hypercube of dimension n. So there are 2 to the n points in this space. And what the encoding does, so you can assume that it's injective, otherwise you are not doing a very clever job. So this means that inside this, you choose 2 to the n points corresponding to the possible images of this function. So it's x1, x 2 to the n. Okay, so these are what are called the code words. Okay, and here I think I should not go below this level, so I will move here. So this is if you want, a very dilute subset, because it's only 2 to the L points in a space which contains 2 to the n points, and n is strictly larger than L, so there are exponentially few points that you are choosing inside. I mean, exponentially many, but exponentially fewer than the total number of points here. And so these are the code words, and the code book that I will denote C like this is the set of all possible code words. Okay, so let's try to have somehow an intuition of what's going on. Is that here, if I want to transmit some z. Okay, so first I transform it in some x alpha. So one of these possible code words, depending on the value of z. So I send it through the channel. Okay, so this will be the original space of the possible sent messages. And okay, it's a rough idea, but you should think that from the noise makes this point move or alter it, and so the outcome of the channel is this y, which is a deformed version of what you put inside. Okay, and the goal now is that the receiver, well, they have agreed, the encoder and the decoder, they agreed beforehand of what is the set of code words they agree to use. So the receiver knows all the position of the possible inputs sent by the sender and the output of the channel. And from this, he has to guess which one was the point sent by the sender. So here, just I make there is an obvious connection with the lectures of Henry Korns, because your first reaction is to say, okay, well, just let's put these points as far as possible in space, and then it will be easy to decode if the modification of if the output of the channel remains inside this the radius between the different points. I mean, I must warn you that this is an oversimplifying view of the problem, and maybe we shall see a little bit that the problem is that here we are in very high dimension, and in very high dimension things do not happen at all like in 2 dimensions. So when you think of this kind of drawing, you see that you have two center of the sphere, and then a deformation vector like this. Well, in high dimension, this vector is always perpendicular to what you think it should be, because there are so many dimensions on perpendicular that you will never choose just for. I mean, there is no. It will be a very small probability for this to be in the plane. So that's a side comment, but be always very careful about geometric intuition in high dimension, because there is none.
Sorry, what do you mean by in the plane?
Sorry?
What do you mean by in the plane?
In the plane, defined by the center of these 2 balls.
Oh.
Okay.
Meaning it doesn't point towards.
Yeah. Well, yeah, once again, it's in high dimension, so I cannot give it a good meaning on the plane, but that's what I mean. That here you have 3 points, and they are not doing what 3 points do usually in space or in low-dimensional space. That's just what I meant. Okay, so here you have this y and x hat of y. So again, is the estimation of x alpha cent. And you see that now from this, what you should guess that the original message Z was is just you take the inverse of the encoding function, which exists by definition because you are not sending 2 messages to the same code word. Otherwise, you obviously cannot distinguish the 2. So you take this to the estimate of x. And so what I mean by this is that from now on, we will just concentrate on the central part of this diagram. Okay, so I have some x, which is a code word, sent through the channel. I get a y, and I want to recover an x hat. Okay, so the 2 parts are not relevant, because these are the easy part of the process. Okay, so for instance, so if you assume that if the 2 to the L messages are possible and are drawn uniformly at random, then X is uniform at random among the elements of the code words or the code book. So that's what we are. That's why we will concentrate on the central part of the diagram. Okay, so now I've already said this in word, but let me formalize a little bit that decoding is an inference problem, and this I will spend just a few words on this, just also to make the articulation with the lectures of Florent, which start this afternoon and which will be centered on this aspect. But it's good to have that you see them in these two settings. So let me deduct by this capital X the random code word. So, as I said, I will assume that its flow is uniform over the code book. Okay, so this is indicator function of the event in it. And so Y is the random output of the channel. And what I can write easily is the conditional probability of the output given the input. Okay, because by definition, the channel I am considering act on each of these bits individually and in the same way. So this means that this probability factorizes over the probability that the ith bit, which was xi, was transformed in yi. Okay, with this transition matrix Q, which, for instance, okay, let me write it for the binary erasure channel. So if I have in input a 0, I get a 0 with probability 1 minus epsilon. I get an erasure with probability epsilon, and I get a 1. Well, I never get a 1. Okay, and the symmetric if you send a 1 inside. Okay, so this describes the probability that given a certain input, you have an output for according to this kind of channel definition. And now, what you are interested in is not this probability. Is on the contrary, you are the decoder, and you want to determine what was sent on the other side of the channel. So this is where Bayes' theorem comes into play. So Bayes' theorem tells you that the probability which is of interest to you is the probability of the input given the output. And this is the probability of the output given the input, the one you know, usually, multiplied by the probability, the marginal probability of the input, divided by the marginal probability of the output. So here there is a part that you know easily. So this is the prior probability on the input, and you know that here you just assume that it was uniform over the code book. And this is the probability which comes from the noise. Yi given xy. And then you have this number, py of y. Okay? But here you see that the only thing that is of interest to you is what depends on x. Okay? Because y, you know it, you have received it. So this, you can just say that this number you don't care, and this number you don't care. I mean, they are just actually normalization constants. So this, I will rewrite them as something which is a partition function. So I denote it z of the fact that the x I know was certainly a code word, and its probability is biased according to this. Okay, so again, Florent will talk more about this inference problem, but here we are clearly in this setting, so abstractly there is a random variable. You don't observe it directly, you observe it through a correlated random variable, and you have to make a guess on the first random variable. But again, here there is a priori no way that you can be sure of what was the input. So the only thing that you can do are probabilistic statements based on this probability. So this is fundamental. Everything will be derived from this, what is called the posterior probability. So this also means that there is not a single way to decode. Okay? So again, you can only make probabilistic statements. So it depends on what you want, on which criterion you want to be optimal. So for instance, you can choose x of y. So your estimate, because at the end you want to produce a value of the input. Even you cannot be sure, but you have to give one answer. And this answer, for instance, could be the one that maximizes the posterior probability, given what you have received. Okay, so that's called the block maximal a posteriori estimate, and maximal a posteriori is abbreviated by MAP. And this is a good choice in the sense that this minimizes the probability that your estimate is different from the input. Yeah?
Just a bit of terminology. Why is it called block? Or what's the block?
Because it's going to be the difference with the next one. Because, no, but here I'm really trying to say, okay, I have sent n bits, and I want all the n bits to be the correct ones. Okay? And if I make this choice, this is a strategy that will that will maximize this, or minimize this, the error measured in terms of the probability that I get all of them wrong. Okay, but you see, maybe you don't want to get all of them, all of them right. Maybe it's better to say, I want to have something which is at a short distance from the correct one. Even if I make a few mistakes, and it's better to be close to the input message. And this is another decoding which optimize this measure. Indeed, this is the symbol map instead of the block map, where I will decode each of the bits independently, where again I'm going to maximize the probability, but not the complete probability, just the marginal probability of the block map. Okay, and this is symbol map decoding, because I'm decoding the symbol I, and this will minimize the average of the Hamming distance between the estimate and the true message. But this, I would rather that you don't ask question on this, because Florent will, I think, say more about this and other measures of the distortion. Right? Right. Okay. Thanks. Well, of course, if you want to ask question, I mean, I cannot prevent you. But, okay, so let's see now Okay, let's try to, well, let's prove the Shannon coding theorem on the binary erasure Shannon. So this was the general setting and definition. For the binary erasure channel is a bit simpler in some sense. I mean, it is simpler because the bits that you get which are not erased, you are sure of them. Okay, so for the back, the output string will be some string 0, 1, 0, 0, and somewhere an erasure, maybe another erasure 0, and an erasure and 0. Okay, but okay, these ones you are sure of them. In other words, the posterior probability, given what you have received, well, let me just state the result, and you will think a little bit about it, but it's very simple. It is uniform over the intersection between the code book and what I will denote the ball defined by y. So it's uniform, so I divide it by the cardinality of this set. And let me be more precise of what I define with the ball of y is just the sequence of 0 and 1s, such that if the bit I that you have received is not an erasure, then X was like this. Okay, so it's maybe a formal way, but that's the precise way of defining that this ball is all the string bits where the 0 and the 1s are kept and the erasures are replaced by any combination that you want. Okay? And that's precisely the posterior probability. Okay? So you just, I mean, the bits you know, and the other ones you don't know. Okay, so let me now go towards the yeah. The posterior probability, okay, maybe it's the posterior probability is different from 0 if X is a code word and agrees with Y on the bits of Y I'm sure of. So it's the intersection of the code word with this ball. And apart from that, I have no more information, so I just have to assume that it's uniform about these possibilities. Okay? And, okay, well, maybe one more word. So you are sure that this, the number of code words which agrees with what you have received, is at least 1. Because what the sender sent is, by definition, in this set. Okay? If it's equal to 1, then perfect decoding is possible. Because, well, this marginal posterior probability is supported on only one point. So you are sure that this was the message sent by the sender. So the problem is to consider, to understand, given the noise, how much this set contains code words that are compatible with what you have received. Yeah.
If it will contain more than one message in the code book, then each of them is equally likely.
Yeah, each of them will be equally likely because you don't have more information than this. That's why. And if you're not completely sure about it, just write the two lines that I skipped just from the definition here, and you will see that indeed that there is no more information to exploit. So when there is no information to exploit, it becomes uniform. That's the general idea. Okay, so everything I did and said up to now was for a given code book. I never precised how I chose the code book. So now I have to explain to you how to choose a code book. And I will explain the simplest construction that is attributed to Shannon, so which is called the random code ensemble, and which is, well, at least reminiscent of the random energy model. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but it has a lot of common flavor with the random energy model, and in particular in the way I shall analyze it. You should see links with what Giulio said and did about the random energy model at the beginning of last week. So the construction is very simple. So I have C, the code book, is a set of strings that have, so I have 2 to the L strings, and each of them is n bits. Okay, it's 1 alpha. Okay, so I have n times 2 to the L bits xi alpha to choose. Okay, and what this construction amounts is to choose all these bits uniformly. I mean, as independently and well, okay, in the same way, zeros and 1 with probability 1/2. Yeah, simpler than that, it's hard to think. Okay, so it seems completely crazy, because first of all, one of the things I said is that you want this this encoding. You'd better have it injective. Okay, but if you do this in this way, you are not even guaranteed that all these points are distinct. Okay, so it seems crazy. But it's not. Again, once again, because high dimensional is rather counterintuitive. So, for instance, just about this, that there is a probability that x alpha is equal to x beta for two different indices, alpha and beta, but that is small when in some sense. When here we will be interested in the limit where n goes to infinity, L goes to infinity with a fixed rate, which is L. So don't worry too much about these problems. Okay, and there are ways to correct for them. So I have a way to construct this code book, and now I want to analyze the probability. I want to analyze the probability of an error if I use such a random code book. Okay, so here you see there are a lot of randomness. So try to keep in mind all of them. So there is the randomness in the choice of the code book. There is randomness in the choice of the code word you want to transmit. And there is randomness in what the channel does to what you send. Okay? But that's all. So here I'm going to do the analysis on the back, the binary erasure channel. So you see that here in this construction, all the code words play the same role. So I can assume, without loss of generality, that x1 has been sent. Okay. Now I have to determine how many code words are compatible with what has been received. Okay, to understand the probability of an error. Okay, so first, okay, what I received is y. Y is equal to x1 on a certain number of bits and erasure on other bits. How many of the bits are correctly transmitted? Yeah, exactly this, or?
With the variation.
Yeah. So the precise statement will be that the number of transmitted, of correctly transmitted bits is a random variable which has a binomial distribution where for each of the n bits that you transmit, you have a probability 1 minus epsilon of success. Okay? You are familiar with this notation, I hope, of a binomial distribution with the number of attempts and the probability of success in each attempt. And this, indeed, when n is very large, this concentrates around the average plus fluctuations which are of square root of n, and that I will forget. Yeah?
So your notation is equivalent to n choose n times 1 minus epsilon, essentially?
Okay, so it depends on. So if I'm talking about random variable, I'm using this to denote equality in distribution. What you said is that the probability that this random variable is equal to k is nk 1 minus epsilon k, 1 minus 1 minus epsilon n minus k. That's the probability that it happens, and this is a random variable. But okay, I'm a bit pedantic here, but okay, I think you can understand what it means. So I can, in the large n limit, I can forget this fluctuation. So I have n times 1 minus epsilon bits which have been correctly transmitted, and epsilon n which have been erased. Okay? So now let me call curly n the number of code words different from x1 that belong to the possible, to the ball, okay? Where they agree with what I received on the bits that have not been erased. Okay? So this again is a random variable. Okay? Because the code word has been generated randomly. But you see that the other code words different from the one I have transmitted, they have been generated independently from the one I transmitted. Okay, so this means that this is a random variable, but which in distribution will also be, will have a binomial distribution. How many of them are they? Well, there are 2 to the L minus 1. Okay, this minus 1 is neglectable, but for the moment I will keep it. These are all the other code words different from the one I transmitted. And what is the probability that they belong to this ball, so that I could mess up with them? Well, for each of the bits that have been correctly transmitted, which are the n times 1 minus epsilon, I have a probability 1/2 that they agree with them. Okay? So, in other words, the probability that 2 code words agree on a certain number of bits is 1/2 to the number of bits. Okay, so if they have to agree on this, this is 1/2 to the power n 1 minus epsilon. Okay, you see the reasoning? So now, here is the analysis which should look like what Giulio did. So if I take the average of this random variable, so you see it's going to be 2 to the n times the probability, minus 1. Okay, this minus 1 is exponentially small, so I can forget about it. So this is essentially 2 to the power L times n 1 minus epsilon, but L is n times R. So this is n R minus 1 plus epsilon, because this is a 1/2. Okay, so again at the exponential order. What you see is if epsilon is smaller than 1 minus R, you agree that this goes to 0. But this is a random number. This is a random positive integer. Okay, if its average goes to 0, it's clear that the probability that it is strictly positive has to go to 0 as well. This is the first moment method. So again, I have not seen the first lecture, but I'm sure that either Chris Moore and or Giulio have used this reasoning. So this implies that the probability that n, this number of confusing code words, is different from 0 goes to 0. We are done. Sure. Because this is precisely the capacity of the duck. So, yeah, actually, to have this, you don't need the second moment. And this is called the Markov inequality. So when the first moment goes to 0 for an integer random variable, you are sure that it concentrates on 0. The second moment you need to make converse statement, when the average can be very large without the typical value being very large. But here I'm really using the simplest version of it, which is the first moment, or Markov inequality. So if you have, let's say, a u, a random variable, which is positive and not necessarily integer, you have the probability that u is bigger than some threshold t is smaller than 1 over t, the expectation. Okay, and for integer random variable, you use t equals 1, and you have immediately this. Okay, so yeah, sorry, I wrote it in a bad way. So as long as epsilon is smaller than 1 minus r, you have this, but this is equivalent of saying that r is smaller than 1 minus epsilon, and this is the capacity. Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Thank you. But well, okay, it says what it should say. Okay, so you see that this statement of Shannon, which was either trivial or impossible. Okay, we proved it. I mean, Shannon first proved it in this way, and this is okay. There are a few details that I'm skipping because here I have taken the average probability of error with respect to everything, so the choice of the chord word and so on. So there are a few tricks if you want to make this very clean, but I will not go into the details and refer you to the bibliography I put on the website. But this is really the statement in the sense that there are codes that achieve capacity with a probability of error which goes to 0, and they are very simple to find. Just take them at random. Okay, so this seems very simple. Okay, I did only the proof for the binary erasure channel because that's the simple one to give you the idea. If you want, as an homework, you can do the proof for the binary symmetric channel, but actually, I mean, I don't leave you just this as a text, so you can find the text and the solution on the website. But the text is some exercise class of the course we gave with Giulio once again. So the only problem is that the notations are exactly the opposite as the one I've used in the lecture. So N, L, X, Z, they are just permutation, but the text is self-contained. So if you want to take it, it should be as possible to follow. And I put the solution, which is in French, but okay, there are many equations, and you can ask the French students in the room. So some of them should even have done this problem and pass the exam. So if they don't manage to do it, just tell me. Okay, so it seems that we are done. I mean, Shannon tells us that there is this capacity up to which we can find codes at this rate. Codes of rates are smaller than this capacity, but arbitrarily close. And it tells you that it's very easy to find them. Just take random code words. So it should have stopped here in 48, but it did not. And there is one reason that, I mean, do you see what the problem is? I mean, to do this in practice,
you can maximize rate?
I can. Here, this works up to 1 minus to rate 1 minus epsilon. So it seems this is not the problem. Now, actually, the problem is how you do in practice the encoding and the decoding. Because you see that here, so let me use this Blackboard. So the problem is that
this is a proof that you can saturate that bound, right? Is this also a proof that you can't go past that?
Ah, no, sorry. This I should have said. Okay, and so the fact. So the fact that if you try to use a rate larger than the capacity implies that the probability of error is strictly positive. This is not contained, is what I've done. But actually, it's not. It's rather simpler, and it's really based on the fact that if you look at the conditional entropy of the input given the output. Here you see that this. You remember this is this is related to the information, to the mutual information, and so on. So it's not too hard to see that in this case, this is strictly positive. I mean, it's extensive, let's say. Okay, and this is just by counting the fact that the capacity is defined in terms of the mutual information. So these are basic inequalities that give you that. And here you see what it tells you is that even when you know the output, there is an exponentially large part of the input configurations that contribute. And this intuitively tells you that you have to, that you cannot decode. And actually, there is something which is called the Fano inequality, which tells you precisely that. I don't know, maybe Florent will give you it, but you can find it. So this part is really...
So can't you just say that if R is bigger than 1 minus n, so you have an exponentially large number of code words that are compatible
For this particular model.
Yeah, that's the point. Well, okay, you still should, do like in the RAM, so you could count them. Okay, here it's a binomial, so obviously it's concentrated, so there is an exponential number. But this is valid and generic for any channel, so that's why it's more powerful. And again, also here, because as I said, I'm hiding a little bit the fact that here I'm computing the error probability average over the code words. So you should work also with to show that it's true also for the maximum over the code words. Okay, so but this is really basic information theory inequalities that tells you that it's not possible if the noise has erased more information that you have put in it. That's okay. So I was saying that the problem is in the encoding and decoding this random code ensemble. This was going to take you an exponential time and actually an exponential memory requirement on your computer. Well, why is this? Well, it's because you have chosen the code words at random, so you have not put any structure in it. So C, so the set of all the code words, I mean, has to be described by the n times 2 to the L bits. I mean, they are completely random, so by definition, they cannot be compressed further from what we have seen in the first lecture. And to do, okay, so this costs you an exponential space on your computer. Then, okay, the encoding is not difficult. You just look at this table and you use, so you use the mapping Z, which tells you X of the index of the index which depends on what you want to transmit. Okay, this is you just use the table. So the encoding is okay once you have wasted an exponential amount of memory on your computer. But the decoding is even worse. I mean, to decode. So, for instance, in the in the case we have treated on the binary erasure channel, you have to the decoding is to find the x, or maybe the several x if you are not very lucky, x that belongs to this ball. But again, if there is no structure in your code book, the best you can do is just to look at all of them sequentially and see whether they agree or not. And that's going to take you an exponential time, because you cannot do better than exhaustive search in the table. You see? And on top of this, I mean, you will say, okay, but maybe I can still do that, but use small code words. So this exponentially large is not very big. But the problem is that the statement of Shanell's theorem is an asymptotic statement. So you really have to take the thermodynamic limit if you want to have good error probabilities. So, okay, it seems that we have, yeah, Eric.
Is there a natural extension to smaller messages? I mean, you don't always want to send a trillion bits.
No, I mean, you know, I mean, in statistical mechanics, it's easy. I mean, relatively easy to make universal or quasi-universal statement in the thermodynamic limit. Explaining finite size system on a generic basis, usually you don't have anything anymore. You don't have phase transitions. So, for instance, this capacity as a phase transition does not make sense anymore. So, okay, the answer is that I don't think so, and I don't think we should expect that that you can have a universal statement in finite size. I'm not saying that, again, as in statistical mechanics, one can do finite size scaling. There are some parts of information theory which have seen finite size scaling studies. But again, it's first order correction to around the thermodynamic limit. Okay, so in the 5 minutes I will introduce the last part of the lectures that we shall do on Wednesday. So as I said, these codes are very good in terms of capacity. They achieve the best that Shannon told us we can hope for, but they are very bad in terms of this computational requirement for encoding and decoding. And I already tried to sketch indirectly the solution of this. So as I said, these random codes are difficult to handle because they have no structure in it. So, well, so the answer to this is put some structure in it. And that's what we're going to do. And that's where we are going to study the so-called low-density parity check codes. So, again, structure. And the structure we shall put is the one of linear algebra. Okay, so here I'm going to make some statement which might, I mean, at first is a bit surprising, but I'm going to, I mean, it is true that this hypercube, 0, 1 to the n, actually it's not the way maybe you are used to view it, but this is a linear space. This is a linear vector space. Okay, so now you have to convoke your rememberings of linear algebra. So a vector space is something which is defined over a field, so the scalars, and here the scalars are, okay, just 0, 1, but sometimes they are denoted as Z2. So a field, you remember you have addition and multiplication over the field. So what is this? So here I have to add and multiply zeros and ones, and I'm going to do it almost in the usual way. So for instance, 0 plus 0 is equal to 0. 0 plus 1 is like 1 plus 0. This is 1. But the only difference is that 1 plus 1 is 0. Okay, so I'm using the addition modulo 2. And for the multiplication, okay, 0 times 0 is 0, 0 times 1, or 1 times 0 is 0, and 1 times 1 is 0. Sorry, is 1. Okay, so this makes a field. So I can define a vector space over this field, and it's just by taking the n coordinates like this. Okay, so this gives me a linear space. And so C, you remember this was my code book. Oh, the code book C, so it's a subset of this set, and is said to be a linear code. Well, if it's is a linear subspace of the vector space I defined above. Okay. What does this mean? Well, this means that if I take x and y in two code words, if I take their sum, which is, if I write the components, it will be x1 plus y1, x2 plus y2, to xn plus yn. Well, again, these additions are modulo 2. Well, this, exactly. That's the usual definition of a linear space in linear algebra. So linear algebra over Z2, there are things which are common to usual algebra over the reals, and things that are different, and sometimes counterintuitive. But I mean, I will not do a formal lecture on this. I will just state what you can do and what you don't have to do. I mean, it will remain very basic, but you have this idea certainly of linear subspace. And let me see that here, maybe in usual definitions, well, you say that the zero, I mean, the origin is in the vector space. Actually, it's a consequence of this, because if you take x plus x, by definition, this is a vector with all zeros that I denote in this way. Because if you add something with itself, with this, you always have 0. So this also has the intuitive notion that the origin is part of a linear subspace, as you are used to it in usual linear algebra over R. Okay, in particular, and this I will use it in the following, so let me insist on this. 0, the vector with all 0 is always a code word of a linear code. And actually, all code words are equivalent, okay, in the sense that if you look at the space 0, 1 to the n from the point of view of one code word, you can make a gauge transformation and say that the origin is that where you are, and you're going to see the world exactly in the same way. Okay, and this I will use also in the following. But okay, maybe I will repeat that at the beginning of next lecture. But just let me state it like this. Okay, so just to make the trailer of last lecture. So here we shall see that we are putting structure by putting a linear algebra structure. So this will solve these problems, that it will be possible to encode a subspace, a linear subspace with much less information than just giving all the points. The question that remains is whether this can be done with still achieving Shannon capacity like the simple random codes. And trying to answer this question, which will bring us maybe back to the one thread of this school, that is the study of statistical mechanics of disordered systems. And we shall see that precisely answering this problem with random linear codes of a certain type is precisely solving a problem of statistical mechanics of disordered systems. And so maybe in the 5 minutes I will do what the organizer asked me to do about the cavity method, and that will be the introduction to the lectures of Federico of next week. Okay, see you on Wednesday.